All right, today we're looking at the beginning of the Qing decline, which will take place in the 1800s. The Qing Empire will go into a decline because of several factors. You will have the government becoming more corrupt. Unemployment will be very high. There's a small tax base of wealthy people that are paying taxes, and you have all kinds of peasant rebellions that are taking place at this time as well. In addition, the Qing Empire is going to have some problems with the West, mostly with the British. Now, it's interesting to look at China's history because they've never been invaded from the sea. They have no history of invasion by the sea. They've always been invaded by the land. Like if you think about the Mongols coming in or the Manchurians when they took over, it was always by land. And so when the British finally make their first explorations to China, they don't really see them as a serious threat. The British were more concerned with trade, of obtaining things like silk and tea and porcelain from the Chinese, more so than actually conquering them. So they wanted more of the trade that was available. And so the Chinese tend to hold the British in contempt because they didn't see anything that they wanted or needed that the British had. The Chinese products were much more superior, and so they didn't feel that the British had anything to offer. In the 1830s, however, the British are going to find something that they could offer to the Chinese, and it will come in the form of opium. Opium is a hallucinogenic drug. It's very addictive, and the British come by opium through India. India was one of its colonies, and they grew poppies there, and so they had this great new trial drug to use. Well, the Chinese become addicted to opium, and it leads to a lot of moral decay in the empire. The emperor actually is going to prohibit the sale and smoking of opium because it becomes so bad in China. It's a symbol of the distress that people were going through. It's a symbol of the corruption that was going on in the government because the officials were paid to look the other way as the British sold it to the Chinese. There's obviously foreign suppliers. The British are bringing it in from India, so the Chinese really couldn't control the trade. And it is a drain on the economy because it's very expensive, and so people start buying more and more of this opium and not really spending it on Chinese stuff, and so they're not making much money. The balance of trade is going to be reversed. The Chinese begin to buy more and sell less. And so eventually the Qing Emperor is going to have a total prohibition of opium in China, and it's punishable by death. Now the British reaction is they're very angry because here they're just selling what people want. And the Chinese response is to put up a naval blockade to prevent the British ships from coming into China. This is going to lead to the Opium Wars, which will take place between 1839 and 1842. And the British are going to end up winning this. The Chinese are going to be forced by the British to give up several concessions, including the city of Hong Kong. It will come under British control. They will also give up access to ports. They will also have to allow British merchants into China. The British are also given the status of most favored nation. So if China was going to trade with anybody, they're going to be trading with China according to this status. And tariffs, taxes on imports, things that are brought into the country, are going to be lifted on the British goods. The British will also form militia units in order to protect its industry, to protect its ships and its trade. And these are also not going to be controlled by the government. There is a loss of respect then for the Chinese, for their government and their military, because they have been defeated. By the mid-century of the 1800s, the failure of the government to pacify or to make peace with the British is going to lead to even further erosion of respect for the government. And so we're going to see more peasant rebellions taking place. Some of these were based in Muslim and Buddhist beliefs or communities. For example, you'll have Taiping, which will take place in between 1850 and 1864. This is going to be about Christianity. A man named Hung Sui Chuan was a young man growing up in this community. He tried to pass the exams to try and become an inspector in the government, but he failed 3 times. And it's a lot of preparation, a lot of stress to do these exams, and so he has a mental breakdown. And while he's recuperating from his mental breakdown, he reads a bunch of Christian pamphlets that were very badly translated into Chinese. And again, while he's recuperating from his mental breakdown, he has these dreams, and he dreams that he is the younger brother of Jesus, that he's the new savior, and that it's his job to drive out the Manchu. And so in order to do that, he forms the Association of God Worshippers. And the Association of God Worshippers' job is to create the heavenly kingdom of great peace. So in 1853, he goes out, and his mission is to take the province of Nanking. And Nanking was a very rich southern province. And he takes it over, and he begins to rival the Manchus. And he begins to pass a bunch of basic reforms for peasants. He is very pro-Western and very anti-Chinese in this respect, that he wants to learn new things. And a lot of that had to came through the Christian teachings that he absorbs. Eventually, we see some new leaders come into China. Most of them are regionally based. They're Chinese-led, but they're regionally based, which means each province basically had their own leader. Eventually, Seng Kuo-fan is going to be asked for help by the Manchu. The Manchu asked for his help with the rebellion, and he is very successful in it. He establishes regionalism in government and the military, but he also, while doing that, can't make all the concessions that he needs to. The Qing are not able to make some of these concessions. The West is eager for military action. And when I talk about the West, we're talking about Europeans. We're very eager for military action. They want a civil war to break out in China, because that means they can come in and save the day, and then China can become their colony, and they don't have to do all this fighting and everything. Well, the goal for the Westerners is to get extraterritoriality, which means that their laws at home work within China. They don't have to follow Chinese laws. So we see a lot of major disruptions happening in China at this time. In 1844, Britain is going to gain the right to protect its missionaries in China, and in addition to that, all the Western nations, not just China, or not just Britain, but France and Germany and Portugal, they all want to get the most favored nation status. Between 1856 and 1869, even more concessions are given for the missionaries, where they can travel, what they can teach, what they're able to do. In 1858, the French and the British are going to invade Canton, and Canton has a port city. In 1860, diplomats will be sent to Peking, and a mini war breaks out, and the British are going to win that as well. The emperor, as a result, is going to flee to Manchuria. Remember, the Qing Empire is led by the Manchus, so he flees back to his home country, and the Westerners are going to burn and loot Peking itself. So now there's this huge dilemma for the West, for the European countries. Do you go with a Qing emperor who you can now control because you basically have shown him who's boss, or do you go with the Chinese enemies, the nationalists, who want to establish more of a democratic sort of government? Well, the goal for the Europeans is to eventually get stability for trade, and so they begin to negotiate with Prince Kung. And so we have these new allies. The people who had been fighting against each other forever are now allies. The Westerners and the Qing are now going to be allies. They're going to help each other out. And so they give each other support against the rebels. And the West is still going to control the sea trade. Missionaries in China at this time, missionaries are religious people who come in and try to convert people, teach them their religion, get them to convert to their religion. And typically in China, it's going to be Chinese Christian missionaries coming in. So there's a lot of concern and hostility towards these missionaries because the Chinese really see them as being so different from their way of life. People who were against the missionaries are going to spread these horrible stories about how the Christian missionaries are going to take the Chinese children to make medicine, and that baptism was really a drowning, and what you got coming out of the baptism after they've been dunked in the river is this zombie that's been, reanimated back to life. So just all these crazy stories. And Confucian scholars are going to encourage these beliefs because they were afraid of the people that they were losing. It gets so bad that in 1870 we'll have the Tientsin massacre take place. The Chinese are going to attack a Christian nunnery, and they kill 10 of the nuns there because they thought they were killing the local children as a blood sacrifice and that kind of stuff. Well, the Chinese humiliation will continue as they continue to not do so well in world affairs. The Chinese are going to have a war with Japan. The Sino-Japanese War will take place from 1894 to 1895, and the Japanese win. In return, the Japanese get Taiwan. They get the Liangshan Peninsula, so that's good for their trade. They get money. They get special rights to Korea. And because of this, China loses a lot of its tributaries, people who had been paying it money because it was protection money, kind of. And so it's going to lose Burma to the British, it's going to lose Vietnam to the French, it'll lose Korea to Japan and Russia, it loses Taiwan to Japan, it loses Manchuria to Russia and Japan. It just ends up not being a good time period for China, which is really a humiliation when you consider how great they had been, where they had come from. So there is going to be several reforms or attempts at reforms to try and change things. Emperor Guangxu will have 100 days of reform, basically trying to figure out how can we fix China and make it great again. And we get a new school system, and the Imperial University will be created. And in both the school system and the university, they try to teach Western science and technical subjects in order to keep up with the Westerners. The railroad, the Navy, the Army will all be rebooted, basically, trying to find ways to improve those things. Empress Dowager Tu Sai and the conservatives are also going to make some major reforms. Now, Tu Sai was a concubine, and she is going to have one son, and it's only one son that she has, and he is supposed to be the next emperor. However, he dies at the age of 19, and her nephew is now going to be the next emperor, and he's 4. And so she kind of steps in and says, I've already had experience of raising a son who is supposed to become the next emperor. So she steps in, and then she's in power when the emperor dies, and this young nephew of hers becomes the new emperor. Well, at this point, we have the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion comes from people who are unhappy with the Qing and the empire itself. They're called the Boxers because the name of the group was the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. And so when people think of, fists clenched, they think of boxers. So that's how you get the Boxer Rebellion. Well, the Boxers are going to attack foreign areas in the city of Peking. So they're going to attack the British and the French and the German areas in there. It's a joint invasion. And so in retaliation, all these European nations are going to come in with more troops to protect their people. And so now they have to decide what are they going to do with China. They keep having these problems. Their people are unprotected in China. And so they're trying to figure out, do we just split up China and make it into little tiny colonies? And the U.S. is going to come in and say, no, let's have an open door policy. And an open door policy says China is basically going to be everybody's colony. All nations are going to have equal access to trade in China. We're just not going to split it up territorially like they do in Africa. Instead, there are going to be spheres of influence, which means that each nation is going to have an area that they're in control of. And in each of these spheres, depending on who was in charge, they're going to have different projects of what they're going to do to make life better there. In some places, they're going to do a lot of construction and make it more westernized, but they do pay low wages to the workers. Western goods are going to destroy the native industry of China. The Westerners are going to bring in workers and make their own silk and make their own porcelain. And basically for the Westerners, it's a race for the Chinese markets. There's millions of Chinese people, and you want them to buy your stuff. So they're going to try and market to them. Now, the Japanese and Russians also want a piece of China, and so they are kind of pushed off to the backside. But that's kind of what happens, is that They felt that they had more rights to China because of their proximity. Now for the Chinese, their government is in a huge amount of debt. They are getting foreign loans at very high interest rates, and the more debt they accumulate, the more control the foreigners have. And so while they kind of remain independent, they really aren't independent. So there's going to be a lot of discontent and eventually a revolution. Students and soldiers are going to be kind of the basis of a lot of popular uprisings. The provinces begin to declare their independence from China itself, and so the end of the Manchu or the Qing Empire will come in 1911. And at that point, China has to figure out what they're going to do next.